Good night, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of what we were calling Theosophy for the Young. It's more than that. This is timeless wisdom for kids. This is a series we have once a month on the middle Wednesday of the month with the one and only Kathy Gann. Kathy has been a theosophist for many years, for decades actually, for 3 decades. She's a student of Theosophy, and she's out of Denver. And she also believes that the practical application of these ancient wisdom teachings gives kids who are exposed to these principles the chance to have a lifelong advantage to think for themselves, to overcome themselves, to self-transform, and learning to be kind. They can learn to be kind and responsible and respect all forms of life. To me, this series is one of the most important things we've ever done here on Living Theosophy, because this is the future of our planet. This is the future of humanity. So if you're here watching the premiere, please comment in the chat if you wish, leave a comment. And if you'd like to, the book is down below that we are talking about. The link is down below. It is absolutely free. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very own Aunt Eleanor, the one and only Kathy Gann. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm so happy to be back. And just a brief recap for those who might be seeing this for the first time. What we're using as a resource is an old book called Because for the Children Who Ask Why. This is a little book that was originally published in 1916 by the Theosophy Company. It's no longer in print in its original form, but there is a PDF online that you can search for and find, and Anne has linked that below. And also you can find it on Amazon. There is a company now that is reprinting a photocopy of the old book, so you can still find a hard copy if you want that. The basic premise of the book, just very briefly, is that it centers around 2 children, Milton and Dorothy. Dorothy is the younger one. We don't know their exact ages, but let's say elementary school. And they have gone to live with their Aunt Eleanor for the summer because their mom was chronically ill and their dad couldn't take care of their mom and the kids all at once. So he sent them to live with his sister, Aunt Eleanor, and she lives in this wonderful big house in a beautiful small town. And she's a very wise lady, a very good wisdom teacher, and she has just endless patience for children and their questions. So over the course of the summer and the years to follow, she answers many, many questions that the children have about how things work. Today, we're going to be talking about what she told the children about the law of cause and effect. That'll be the first thing we'll cover, in other words, karma. And then we're going to touch on a topic that I think is on a lot of people's minds, not just children, but adults as well. And that is, why is it that bad things happen to good people? Mm-hmm. So as we open, I should mention too, if you haven't seen last month's episode, in chapter 5, we talked about the fact that the children's mother did pass away. And what happened after that is that their dad left the city and came to live with the children and Aunt Eleanor. So they spend their childhood growing up with Aunt Eleanor and their dad in this wonderful house in a beautiful little town. So they had quite a lovely upbringing, and they got to stay with Aunt Eleanor after all. So this story, today we open with 2 days of solid rain. And Anne, they live in England, so you can relate to 2 days of solid rain. And it was raining hard. They couldn't get outside at all for 2 solid days. And so finally on the 3rd day, the clouds broke up a little bit. The wind blew the clouds away. The sun came out, and it was only a matter of minutes before Dorothy and Milton and Aunt Eleanor had their coats on and their rubber boots, because it was still, wet and sloppy outside. And they wanted to go down to the arroyo, which is a stream bed that's fairly deep, and it's normally dry, but when there's a heavy rain, then it will get filled up with gushing water. So they wanted to go down and see that and see how full it got from the rains. So they put on their coats and boots and went down to the arroyo, and sure enough, it was just full and was rushing, and there was a lot of, mud and sticks and twigs and things. So a lot of debris and rushing water, and they had such a wonderful time. The sun was finally shining. They could hear the birds singing again. The birds were happy. They got a big entertainment out of watching the rushing water. It was just kind of a big deal to get out of the house. On their way home, they passed by a few little puddles, rain puddles. And one of them was just particularly clear and smooth and calm and glassy. There wasn't so much as a ripple, very quiet. So Aunt Eleanor stopped by that one and she said, throw in a stone, Milton, and let's watch what happens. So Milton threw the stone into the puddle and Aunt Eleanor said, there. Now, see how the circles spread out wider and wider from where the stone dropped in. Now they've reached the shore. Wait, see them go back again, back, ever smaller to where the stone first dropped. And Aunt Eleanor said, do you know, that is exactly what happens when any stone is thrown by anybody into any pond. The stone makes a point of disturbance from which ripples go out, and then they return to the same point where the disturbance originally happened, where the stone originally fell in. She said the falling of the stone is the cause of the ripples. The ripples are the effect of that cause. So the stone dropping in is the cause, and then the ripples are the effect. And she said something kind of big and important to the kids. She said, if you will remember just how and why it happened this time, you will have learned the most important law that anyone can ever know, no matter how wise or powerful they may be. She said, when you kids are older, you'll learn to say it like this: action and reaction are equal and in opposite directions. And Eleanor is correct. We all learned this in school, didn't we? For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the ripples going out to the shore was the action of the water, and then coming back again to the same place from which it started, that was the reaction. And then Aunt Eleanor said something kind of mysterious, something that takes a little bit of thought. She said, but the most interesting thing about this law is that it acts not only where we can see it, but it acts everywhere and all the time. And it acts even more where we don't see it than where we can see it plainly. It works inside us, just as it works everywhere else outside of us. She said, it's this law that we name karma. So as they were walking home, Dorothy said, tell us how it works inside, Auntie. So as always, Aunt Eleanor used an example that would be very easy for the children to understand and relate to. Now remember, Dorothy is a little girl who has an older brother. So Aunt Eleanor used an example that she could really relate to. They said, well, suppose that some little girl became angry at her brother and she pushed him off a step. And suppose that he stumbled backward and he fell onto his back so hard that he really injured his back badly and he would never be able to walk again. He would be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Just looking at it on the surface, it would seem that nothing bad happened to the little girl. There was an action, her pushing him off the steps and injuring him, but it would appear that there was no bad reaction to her from her anger. But of course there really was, because she could never escape for the rest of her life from the sadness of knowing that she had so badly injured her brother. So Dorothy took this in, and she had a big brother herself, so she has a little bit of experience in these matters. And she said, if her brother had been teasing her though, and pulling her hair maybe, wouldn't she be right in getting angry? And Aunt Eleanor said, no. A wise man once said that there's no such thing as what we call righteous indignation, and that all anger is foolish, always foolish. So she said, nothing that anyone does or says should ever stir us to anger. She said, remember now, it's only our own conduct that we need to criticize. So if we just see to it that we do the right and the kind thing by others, then I think somehow others would soon find very little pleasure or fun in trying to annoy us. If they find that we can't be annoyed by them, they'll soon stop trying to have that kind of fun. And Dorothy, being very thoughtful, she said, but the little boy, Auntie, how did he deserve so much punishment just for teasing his sister? That doesn't seem right. Aunt Eleanor said this was one of those times when action and reaction was harder to see and understand. She said, well, he did deserve it in some way, no doubt of that. Law would not be law if it worked in some places and not in others. And of course, Theosophy does teach us that although most things that happen do happen according to universal law, there is such a thing as a true accident, but true accidents are so very rare that we can pretty much count on universal law being in action when something happens. So she said, it may be that this little boy was born with a tendency to annoy other people. And it may be that in some other body that he'd lived in before, maybe he had cruelly teased some unfortunate person in such a way that it resulted in a lasting harm to that person. And Eleanor said, if that were true, then you could see how he deserved similar suffering, can't you? Well, Dorothy wasn't so sure. She said, oh, but it was so long ago, Auntie. Seems like he might be excused, right? And Eleanor said, well, who would excuse him, dear? No one but himself can excuse him. But even if some other person could and did excuse him, do you suppose he would have learned his lesson as well as when he himself meets the consequences of what he sees to be a wrong act? She said, sometimes the law can appear to be cruel and unjust, but in truth, it is only just and merciful. And you can see that if you remember that we are in this life and we are in these bodies for one reason, and that is to learn, to become wise, and also to help others learn and become wise. She said, we all have the same lessons for us to learn, but some learn more quickly than others. So that was, they had reached home at that point, and that was kind of the end of their discussion for that day on karma. And it kind of came up again at a later time. One evening when Dorothy and Milton had gone upstairs to bed, their father asked Aunt Eleanor, why were the children so quiet and subdued tonight, Eleanor? And Aunt Eleanor said, well, they had a severe shock this morning. She said that she'd gotten a letter from someone who lived in another town, letting them know that a member of their family, a young woman by the name of Marion, had died. Now, Marion was a lovely young woman. They don't say how old she was, but I'm guessing maybe a young teenager. And she was just a lovely young lady who would often visit her relatives in the same town where Aunt Eleanor lived. And so Dorothy and Milton were accustomed to being with Marion whenever she would visit. And they just thought the world of her. Marion was always so kind and so lovely to them, and they just thought the world of her. So it was not only that she had died, it was how she died. That was such a shock to their systems. And here's what happened. And this happened not in Aunt Eleanor's town, but in the town where Marion lived. One day, a little child, a little girl who was just learning to swim, was out in the water, and she got swept away by a strong undercurrent so that it swept her all the way out beyond the breakers. The breakers are very strong, violent waves out a little bit from shore, the big crest of the waves that you see. And you would have to be a very, very strong swimmer. And even then, I don't know if you could get back through the breakers. You almost have to have a motorboat to get out through the breakers. So Marion saw this, she saw what happened. And, just in a flash, she knew that if she went out there to get to that child, she probably couldn't get back through those breakers, at least not without help, but she didn't hesitate. She swam out there. Somehow she made it through the breakers. Maybe the current carried her through as well. And she made it to the little girl. So now she's helping keep this little girl afloat. Nearby, there was a man in a motorboat, and he saw what was happening. So he jumped in his boat and he sped out to where the children were. He got there in time, and he lifted the little girl into the boat. So the little girl was saved, but the water was so choppy and so violent that the back of the boat swung around, struck Marion very hard. She probably lost consciousness, and she sank to the bottom. They couldn't save her as well, so she died. So that was what happened. And when Dorothy and Milton found out about it, they really didn't have any questions right off the bat. They needed time to think about this and process it. It was several days before Dorothy even brought it up to Aunt Eleanor. But finally, Dorothy said, Aunt Eleanor, how could Marion meet with such a death when she was acting with so little thought of herself? I thought that unselfish thinking and acting could only bring about good karma. So Aunt Eleanor said, well, Dorothy, that is a really, really good question. And it's a question that even a lot of grown-ups have had about Jesus, for example. He was such a good and kind person, bringing such good teaching to the world. And then he was crucified. Now, how could that happen? What was at work there? Was that somehow his karma? So Aunt Eleanor said, she didn't really think that it was karma. And she's talking about Jesus now. She said, or at least not in one way of looking at it. She said that the thinker and perceiver in Jesus knew before that lifetime what would happen, generally speaking. Wouldn't have known the details, but she said he knew before he came into that life, generally speaking, how it would go. But he chose it anyway, out of his boundless compassion. And it was kind of the same thing with Marion. She knew that if she swam out to that little girl, it was very possible, even probable, that she might die. And Eleanor said, but the heroism of her soul, the hero inside her, caused her to risk her life to save that little girl. A wise person once said that the greatest kind of love you can have is the kind of love that makes you lay down your life for your friend. And Eleanor said that's the kind of love that Marian's was. Even though the little girl was a complete stranger to Marian, her compassion made her risk her life for the little girl. And then Aunt Eleanor, as she always does, said something very encouraging about the situation. She said that to her mind, such an act of heroism in one life would bring Marian's soul back into incarnation again, where it would come in contact with wonderful people and teachers whose whole lives were about compassion. And then Marian could be with those people, and her soul would work diligently to become even more and more like them. So Dorothy had a good idea. She said, well, maybe that little girl had been Marian's friend in a previous lifetime. And then Dorothy said, but sometimes several people die together in an accident. And Eleanor said, yes, and sometimes those accidents come about as a result of carelessness. But when things like that happen, the souls involved are, you might say, balancing out old debts on the ledger of life. So in other words, there is some kind of karma at work that we can't know about, that we don't see, and just know that this law is operating in an ultimately just and merciful way. And then Aunt Eleanor said, Marian's death is an inspiration to us all. She said, there are too few people who are willing to stand up for what they believe is right, and far fewer still who are willing to die for it. So we might say that Marian did what she thought was right. In other words, what the light inside her told her was right, and she was willing to die doing it. And Eleanor said, when we see someone so brave that they're willing to give their life for others and to serve others to the utmost, then shouldn't all of us live better and stand more boldly for truth? So Dorothy took all of that in and she said, thank you, Aunt Eleanor, I feel better now. She said, you always make things seem so large and right, as if the horizon had somehow lifted itself and other worlds are seen in the distance. Dorothy said, and you make me want to be a hero too. And Eleanor said, every theosophist has to be a hero, I think, Dorothy.
Oh, thank you. That was so beautiful. Oh, the hero within each one of us. That's true. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you for those stories. Absolutely. My favorite part of living Theosophy is my time with you, Kathy. Although I've been studying for a few years, I learned so much when you represent these teachings for these little ones. And again, parents and grandparents, teachers, families. This is so imperative. And the hero within each one of us. Bless you. Thank you.
And it's not just a story. Interestingly, as I was preparing this material for today, I heard a story on the news just in the last few days. I live in the United States, and in the state of Texas, which borders the Gulf of Mexico, so a lot of water. There was an actual news story that reminded me very much of what had happened with Marian, except it has a much happier ending. There was a dad with his two children, just like Dorothy and Milton, a little boy who was 7 and his little sister who was younger. And the kids were down out of the boat. They were in the water and swimming around and playing. And the little girl had a life jacket on. The little boy didn't. And something happened. I don't recall what it was, but something happened. And the little boy observed that his sister was in trouble and she needed help. So he swam over to her and he's helping hold her afloat. I don't know exactly what happened or why she needed help. But then the dad could see that this had happened. And so he jumped into the water and he had both of his children and he was trying to tread water and keep both of his children afloat and realized that he couldn't stay that way for very long and there was just no help around. So knowing that his son at 7 years old was a very strong swimmer, he told his son, swim for shore and get us some help. So that little boy took off swimming. He knew which direction shore was and he took off swimming and he swam and swam and swam. When he would get tired, he'd turn over on his back and he'd paddle his feet, like, kind of like a doggy paddle, but upside down. And then he'd swim some more and then he'd turn on his back and paddle his feet to rest. And he kept on like that until he reached the shore. It took him a full hour. After he got to shore, he went to the nearest house and got some help. Help was sent and the family was saved. So there are real life heroes. This little boy at 7 years old saved his dad and his sister.
Oh, it's a great way to capitalize on what we learn. What a beautiful little soul, 7 years old.
7 years old.
Yeah. And that's
Children have that hero inside of them, just like grown-ups do.
Yeah, we all have that hero. We just need to access that hero. It's inside you. If you're watching right now, it's inside you. You don't have to look too far. All the myths and legends talk about heroes on this quest and these trials and tribulations. It's really you that they're talking about. And these trials and tribulations are this life right now. What a fantastic lesson with you, Kathy Gann. Thank you so much for all you do for us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So we're looking forward to more in this series. We're going to be delving further into, the book is called Because, for the Children Who Ask Why. Again, there is a link down below. If you'd like to leave a comment or a question, if you'd like to find out more, there are 2 previous episodes, and we hope to have many, many more. Kathy, the way you deliver it with so much empathy and compassion, it is like channeling this Aunt Eleanor's otherworldly wisdom. And it's always so comforting. I always come away from these just feeling like you described, like the horizon had lifted just a little. Thank you so much. Oh,
Thank you.
bless you. So we'll see you again next month, then in the middle of the month, every month around the 15th. We try to get these out on a Wednesday. Ladies and gentlemen, Kathy Gann. Thank you, Kathy. We will see you soon. Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you would please like, subscribe, and share. That would be wonderful. Thank you. On behalf of all of us here at Living Theosophy, we love you.